So, Chief Innovation Officer at Bagel Brands and a best-selling author of People Before Things. Let's start with Bagel Brands and tell us a little bit about what Chief Innovation Officer means.
Well, it's a fancy title, and ultimately, the easiest way for me to describe it is that the focus is experience of the future. We wanted to think about our business 5-10 years from now. What would it look like, and what would the consumer want out of a bakery? Mm-hmm. And we wanted to be able to put a specific focus around that. A lot of that is digital experience, which is sort of a no-duh, I think, for everybody that's watching today. We more and more have mobile apps on our phones, but some of it is also not technology related at all. It's simple tweaks that we can make in the guest experience that, again, just sort of goes where the trends are going and ensures that we keep a forward look at this business, which I think clearly during a time like right now is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I hear innovation, I hear transformation, and I hear this great forward-looking approach, and that means change. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about change. And when I think of change and I think of leadership, obviously it's a nice segue into the second half of your introduction, which is your book, People Before Things. So maybe give a little bit, since it's so specific to this topic, about the theme of that book.
Well, I wrote the book at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. I quit a cushy day job that I had at the time as the Chief Information Officer at Red Robin. We were experiencing enormous growth and transformation, almost at a 10x level in terms of our stock price. And it seemed like a good time to take a break and to share some of the experiences with other leaders in the industry. The idea that I had was, well, you know, Red Robin is a burgers and shakes business, and people get burgers and shakes, and so it's not going to be a real complicated read. I wanted to write a book about change and what the role is that leaders play in change, but I wanted it to be written from someone who had been in an executive leadership role. Because a lot of the books I read are from people who study executive leaders and have a lot of great advice, but haven't always walked a mile in the shoes of an executive leader. So in some ways, I wanted to pick a fight with leaders, and this included picking a fight with myself about, like, what do people in organizations need from their leaders when there is a lot of change going on? That all of the statistics say that people are suffering through change, that Gallup has reported that 70% of all change fails. And at the same time, Gallup also reports that almost 70% of the US workforce is disengaged. And I thought there's got to be some relationship to that. I know that some people think that change isn't working because people are disengaged at work. And what I was wondering is, well, what if it was that we were driving change so poorly that that's actually creating the disengagement? And I just wanted to explore that topic as a practitioner, as somebody who had been living this journey of change and transformation in the executive seat. I didn't really have a lot of expectations for the book, but it ended up doing quite well. And so I ended up having the opportunity for 3 years to just go out and support the book through consulting and doing speaking engagements. And the opportunity I got there was to meet thousands and thousands of leaders across the country and to listen to their personal journeys and stories around change and transformation. And it just was a wonderful time in my life that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, it's such an incredible preparation for, you know, for the different things that we're going through. And you know, traditionally we talk about change and what we do, because obviously Earlier on the forum, we talked about governance and data literacy and how it creates this new language. And obviously that creates the need for change. And we use buzzwords like change agents and these fun things. But most people, when we talk about that and we say change management, they think, okay, we need some training, and we need lots of communication, and we're going to just put that out there and then the rest will work. But I think you have a better and deeper understanding of that. So maybe talk about the difference between just communicating and training and what real change looks like from a leadership standpoint.
It's funny because my understanding of change management at one point was just around training and communications as well. And I remember I was driving this big change initiative at Red Robin, and we had this outside company helping us, these change experts help us. And what they had to do is they had to go into the support center and they had to interview people from all of the various functions that were going to come together for this big change initiative. And the goal of those conversations with all of those cross-functional areas was to just find out who was going to ultimately block this change, who was going to get in the way of the change, and why were they not going to get on board. And I remember the consultants came into my office and I sat down and I was like really attentive, and I just pulled myself up to the table and I'm like, I want to know right now who is going to be my biggest blocker for change. And the consultant said, well, I mean, Chris, this is kind of interesting and we're sort of sorry to have to deliver you this message, but IT is the organization that's least ready for change. And it was a punch in the gut that needed to happen, because it caused me to just really stare in the mirror and reflect on what my role was as a leader. And what I realized in this project, and I think that I had been picking up along the way in my career, is that change are these other things that basically make it easy or really hard to be successful. And that communications and training are on the very, very back end of change and are actually just a reflection of everything that's going on in the organization. So if the organization has a lot of dysfunction and isn't set up for change, well, then the training and the communications seem very dysfunctional. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of like a memo from a CEO, and we're like, where did this come from? Or we go into a training session with someone we've never even met before, and they're telling us that there's some mandatory process or technology we need to start using.
That's going to make your life better, right?
You're
right. It's going to make your life better.
It's going to be so awesome. So anyway, I started to deep dive at that time. Well, what are the reasons why people resist change? And it turns out that the reasons people resist and push back change really have less to do with training and communications, and they had more to do with these like very practical things that as a leader, it was my job to do something about. So if I give you one example, one of the conclusions I reach in the book, one of the 7 reasons why people push back on change is because they don't have the time of day to absorb change. They have no capacity to do something new. They have a day job. That day job takes them 40 to 50 hours a week to do the work. And someone comes along and says, hey, I want you to learn this new system. And it's going to take you about 10 hours a week for about 5 or 6 weeks to get good at this system. Where are they going to get that time? And so it's not that people are resisting change. It's not that people are lazy. It's that people are tired. And it's not that people don't care. Like I used to think as an executive, I'd be like, well, if people are as committed as I am about the brand, they'll come in and do the extra work. And this has nothing to do with commitment, right? We all have relationships we're trying to nurture. In some cases, we have sick and dying parents. We have all of these things going on in our lives where giving discretionary effort is not a choice. So my job as a leader is to clear the decks, to get really clear on what's important and what should the priorities be. And the stuff that's not that important should be pushed aside. And if this new change initiative is really important, then, and it's going to take people 10 hours a week to learn, then my job as a leader is to say, hey, you spend about 15 hours a week doing X, and I'm going to go ahead and take that responsibility away for the next few weeks while you're learning this new system. I don't even want you to worry about that. That's the role of a leader. If I throw training and communications on top of an already busy work schedule, who is going to show up to the training and who's even going to read the memo? I mean, I don't, you know this, Dan, I don't even read email. So if I'm not reading email, why do I expect other people are going to read email? So the book really explores this. It came from this journey as a leader where I was really trying to understand, what do I need to do to make sure my people are really successful? And what is my role in that? I did not want to be the executive who showed up on the kickoff meeting. It was the only time you'd ever see me. And I would be like, failure is not an option. And then leave the room and then come back 15 weeks later. And it turns out failure is an option. And we had failed miserably. And I had abandoned the team. Or the other example is, and I know if you, for the people that are dialed in right now who are IT people, they'll understand this. The very people who ask you to do this work are like nowhere to be found when you're doing the work. Right. So they have a role to play in this. I have a role to play in this. And the byline of the title, People Before Things, is change isn't an end user problem. People are not resisting change. People, just like the time thing, have not had the right conditions put in place for them to be successful.
It's so fascinating, the insight, because I have been in both chairs, and I have been, unfortunately, I laughed a little too wholeheartedly when you have this. Well, if they're committed, if they're bought in, then they're all going to be on board. And what I loved about the People Before Things book and the concept is it starts with kind of grabbing the mirror, right? And looking in the mirror first and figuring out what's my role in this problem versus how do I fix other people and fix other parts of this organization. Right. So I love that piece. And I've been kind of tongue in cheek today around most of the topics we've been talking about are sitting on top of an already complex situation, and now we've added crisis.
Yes.
And so,
for sure,
change leadership is difficult, period, and it is something that's hard in leadership in general. But what are your thoughts now, as you've been a leader in this? And someone quipped on Tuesday that we're all change agents, but we actually hate change ourselves, or that we're resistant to change ourselves. And so,
of course,
as you've lived through this, and as someone who's kind of an expert in the space, what is it like in crisis? How is it different now?
Well, first of all, what I'll say is, there is a difference between a controlled change initiative, where a team of people have been working on something perhaps for 6 months, that an organization has gone through the process of investing in it and budgeting for it. And at some level, there's been some conversation for months leading up to it. Even then, it's hard. And what's different now is this is a different kind of change. This is the uncontrolled crisis that hits us out of left field. And we have to read and react. And what I think is really interesting right now as I study this and see this going on, I think startups and smaller companies are naturally positioned in a crisis to be able to respond to it more, because there's a little bit more responsiveness already built into their business. When you're building a new business, it's not so contrived. You're not building a business plan that lasts for 18 months. You're thinking about it in terms of 3 to 6 months at a time. And in crisis, we need to be in that 1 to 3 months. But here's the thing, I think, ultimately, that all of this requires from us as leaders. I do think that the controlled change initiative and the short-term crisis do have something in common. And what that is that what people really need is they really need leaders to show them 2 things: love and clarity. And they need that in crisis, and they need that in a big change initiative. That when people come to work, they just want those 2 simple things from their leaders. They want to know that that leader cares about them, And so when I say love, it isn't, put your arms around them and hug them in an HR inappropriate way. I'm talking about simple things that demonstrate we care. And then people want clarity. And I want to just sort of point out that clarity is not the same as transparency. Transparency is vomiting a bunch of information on people and hoping that they make sense of those parts and pieces. Clarity is when you help people find their story in your story, that they can see that there's a future for them, that there's safety and security in this future, and that they play an important role when they show up to work. And it's funny because all of the workplace happiness studies, they conclude different things about what people want at work. But what's interesting is that all of those different studies, they do link back to a common thread, which is when we get out of bed in the morning and we put our 2 feet on the ground, the one thing that we want is we want to feel like we're making a difference. And so love and clarity is so required. It's such a requirement for leaders to provide that so that people feel like they're making a difference. And I think, again, that is required, whether it's a big change initiative that you've been planning for, which is amazing, right? Because the Gallup data in that 70%, it's in that category. It's the stuff you've been actually thinking about and you budgeted for and you've been working on. And even when you knew it was going to happen, it still didn't happen well. So you can only imagine what happens in crisis. And so I just think if I were giving a talk to a room full of leaders, and I know there's a lot of leaders on this webinar, I would just say it just comes back to love and clarity. And how do you do that in crisis? Some people will see the crisis as an opportunity. I think it's possible that there's a crisis and there's an opportunity, that those two things can actually coexist in the same sentence. But I also recognize there's some businesses out there like hospitality. When you think about hotels, or you think about restaurants, or you think about even people massage therapy, I think about movie theaters. There's no opportunity in this. There's no opportunity. So it's crisis, it's pure crisis. And so how do you provide people in those scenarios with that love and clarity? And again, it's just, to me, it's as simple as that. And if we don't, as leaders, have time for love and clarity, and we don't provide that in crisis or in planned change initiatives, if we can't do that, then I think it's a tall order for us to expect that our teams are going to just magically put it together.
I completely agree. And I think, honestly, the most powerful lessons as a leader are the ones that are the most simple. And I greatly appreciate how simple love and clarity are. And we know that time is the only resource we can't change, we can't buy more of, and we can't get more of. And so the biggest travesty that we talk about as a leadership team is if our people are spending time making a difference in the wrong areas. And if they're spending their energy improving things that are lower down the totem pole, or that aren't really moving the needle for us as a brand or as a company. And so I love the love. I love the empathy side of love. I think it's so powerful, especially today. And, I hear people, I had someone quip with me on LinkedIn about crisis as an opportunity, and it's tough. I think from a business standpoint or from a financial standpoint, that's a tough bridge to cross. From a human connection standpoint, I get the merit there. There's an opportunity to love the person that you work with, and to create a human connection, that it's okay to be scared during these times. It's okay not to feel confident in what's going to happen to us, but life will go on, and that's hard to see at times. So I get that side of it, but I think what you said is really spot on and fascinating. With just those two things, you can really move the needle as a leader.
Well, and here's the reason why I use the word love too, and I just would clarify this with everyone. My 18-year-old son just graduated from high school, and he had a really huge theater career in high school. And I was always so curious about Caleb and what he was learning in theater and how I could apply that to life. And one day he was telling me that, you know, when they are rehearsing or getting themselves ready for any show, they are always trying to amp their emotion 10x what it is that they're trying to demonstrate.
Mhm.
Because when you're sitting in an audience, it can get lost. It can get lost in all these things that distract you. So they have to be 10 times more expressive than what the character and the emotion is actually asking for. And which I think is so fascinating.
Mhm.
And so that's why I use the word love. Because as a leader, if I can 10x what people need from me, people don't truly need like love that they would get from their significant others or from their family. But if I can at least in my head frame it as this 10x thing, like, hey, when I show up, I have got to be expressive of love, then there might be half a chance that I'll actually execute that. And so, again, I just think that people want to know that we care about them. And in crisis, I think about like, how do they know that? Well, they know that when you communicate with them constantly,
Mhm.
and that when you communicate with them, you communicate with them authentically. So I try. I know with my team, we get together. We were getting together daily. Then we changed it to twice a week. Now once a week. And when I get on there, I'm not trying to like screen or mask my own emotions in the moment. I want them to know that just like them, I'm suffering at home. And I know, Dan, you and I have talked about this. We're both extroverts. So we are, you know, when you're feel like your only option is to sit in four walls in front of a desk between you and a computer, it can really do crazy things to your head. So I
Yeah.
want them to know that. And that's the most sincere way I know in terms of expressing love to them is that I care about them enough that I want them to know that I too am feeling the struggles that they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. The basis of courage is vulnerability, and I think that sharing that does show that. And you know, the 10x concept applies to clarity too, right? Like we always say as leaders, like you have to say it 10 times for them to even remember.
Right.
And you feel like you've said it 100 times because you've talked about it behind closed doors to all kind of other people. But when you get in front of your teams, you say it once and you expect them, well, I told them once, how could they be confused about this concept? And
Um,
yeah, I think the 10x, I love the expressive analogy for theater because it applies to everything. It applies to empathy and love. It applies to the clarity piece just as much. So that's a nugget I'll definitely take with me. Um, there's so many people in this audience that, and I hope that this reaches with this message, who might be saying, I get that. Like, I think I can do that, but I'm sitting in a boardroom or I'm sitting executive team with people who don't see that. So when we talk about leadership and their understanding of change, you've obviously studied it, you've had an epiphany. How do you go viral within your executive team to get them to see that and to not have some of the things that we were kind of jokingly speaking of, those misperceptions around how to drive change?
well, I think it's a great question, and it's one of the more popular questions I heard for 3 years. Sometimes they get framed differently in an audience. Someone in the audience would say, like, I totally get this, I believe this, but my executive that I work for is a jerk and he'll never get it. And I used to always say to those people in the audience, well, then you need to quit. I mean, listen, if you believe that you have a value disconnect with your boss and you're never going to line up, then this is on you. You got to move on. But to be serious for a minute, I do think it is about action, results, and then talk. So I think, like, as an example, if these ideas resonate, the worst thing you could do, I think, is go talk to an executive team and then try to, through words, convince them that this is the way they should think about it. So I think the best thing to do is to take these things you believe in, you put them in action, and then you get undeniable results. I'm not talking about results that are just a little bit better. You should be seeing massive productivity improvements when you implement this. All the studies say for a fact that you'll get 30 to 50% productivity improvement from it. That's massive. So put it in action, get those massive results, and then, and only then, when someone says, how did you get those results? That's when you say, oh, well, let me tell you what I did. And then you trumpet the merits of engaging people and bringing them with you and pacing change with people and all that good stuff. I just know too many times in my career, I have been the self-righteous one, where I show up and I say to a group of people, this is what we should do. If we were good people, this is what we would do. And it just falls on deaf ears, because I think a lot of times people think that this touchy-feely stuff is different than concrete results. And that's not the case at all. I mean, I think about all the audience that I talk to, and I would say, hey, think about your successes in your career, the winning teams you've been on. Every time you've ever won, like, what did those teams all have in common? I swear to God, Dan, 100% of the time, people in the audience would say those teams had communications, respect, trust, collaboration. They had a unified vision. They were accountable. The results, 100% of the time. And I would say that's interesting, because you didn't talk about cloud in your answer. You didn't say you were on winning teams because you had an awesome project plan. You didn't say you were on winning teams because you had cool Excel spreadsheets. Every one of you in the room, you just said that communications, respect, and trust and collaboration are the reasons you won. So the question I ask is, if that, we all know that, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we talking about it more? And inevitably, the audience would say, because it's not tangible. Because this touchy-feely stuff, you can't measure it. But then if you follow it up with, well, what are you trying to accomplish right now in your business? Well, we're trying to grow sales. What else are you trying to do? Well, I'm trying to improve profit. What else are you trying to do? We're trying to, do this, do that. It turns out that these things are immeasurable when it's just you and I talking about them, but they actually show up in the results.
Absolutely.
In the results of winning or losing. So I think our role to sort of influence executive leaders down this road is to get great results, to get a great score on the scoreboard, and now we have permission to talk about it. And by the way, if we don't get good results from doing that, then we try differently, and we keep working the model until we have something that we can talk about, and that we can talk about in a Twitter-size update to an executive. And then change can happen. And then ultimately, if you don't think you can do that and the executives don't change, then you're truly working in the wrong place. You just need to move on. You have a difference in values. You wouldn't stick in a personal relationship with someone who had a difference of values for too long. So why would you allow yourself to do that professionally? Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's perfect. It was a perfect answer. Some powerful stuff today. I knew it was going to be a good conversation, and change is such a fascinating topic. I didn't realize how powerful it's going to be. So I'm taking away from it love and clarity. I'm taking away from it 10x, and I'm definitely taking away actions and results before speaking. So thanks so much, Chris.